Everybody thinks BMW invented the perfect sports sedan, that magic formula of a practical four-door family car hiding a razor-sharp, rev-happy sports car heart. Ask any car enthusiast on the planet and they will tell you the same thing. It all started with BMW. It all started with the legendary 2002. But what if I told you that everything you think you know about this story is wrong? What if the car that actually invented this formula wasn't German at all? What if it was Italian, built years earlier, and almost completely written out of history? And here is the part that should really bother every BMW fan watching this right now. Without this one obscure, oddly shaped Italian sedan, there is a very real chance BMW would never have become the company we know and worship today. This is not a theory. This is not fan speculation. This is a story buried in engineering archives, dusty showroom records, and the memories of people who drove both cars back when they were brand new. By the end of this video, you are going to look at every BMW sports sedan completely differently, and you are going to understand why one nearly forgotten Alfa Romeo deserves more credit than almost any car in automotive history. Stick around because the ending of this story is going to surprise you even more than the beginning. Let's go back to where it all began. Picture the automotive world in the early 1960s. If you wanted a family car, you were stuck with something soul-crushingly boring. Vague, numb steering that told you nothing about the road. Cart springs that bounced and wallowed over every bump. Handling so lifeless, it felt like driving a filing cabinet on wheels. And under the hood, engines that behaved less like machines built for driving pleasure and more like cement mixers, groaning and grinding their way through daily life. This was the reality for almost every ordinary family car buyer in Europe. Practicality and excitement simply did not exist in the same vehicle. You either bought something dull and reliable for the school run, or you bought something fast and impractical that your family could never actually use. Nobody had figured out how to combine both. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, Alfa Romeo released a car that broke every single rule of what a family sedan was supposed to be. It was called the Giulia. And when it rolled off the production line in 1962, something happened that nobody in the industry saw coming. An ordinary father, an accountant, a shopkeeper, anyone with a normal budget could now walk into a dealership and drive out in a car capable of embarrassing a genuine sports car on a twisting mountain road. Let that sink in for a moment. This was not a limited edition halo car built for the wealthy. This was a mainstream family sedan that could humiliate machines costing several times more. And the engineering behind it was so far ahead of its time that it almost feels like a mistake in the timeline of automotive history. Let's talk about what actually made the Giulia so radical, because this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. When most manufacturers in the early 60s were still fitting cars with leaf springs and drum brakes on all four corners, technology that had barely evolved since before the war, Alfa Romeo did something almost unthinkable. They gave the Giulia coil spring suspension all the way around the car. They fitted disc brakes on every single corner, not just the front, like some sportier rivals of the era, but all four wheels. And for most models, they paired this chassis with a genuine 5-speed gearbox, at a time when a 4-speed was still considered generous on an everyday saloon. This was not evolutionary improvement. This was a manufacturer essentially throwing out the entire rulebook for what a family car should be and starting from scratch with the mindset of a race engineer. But even that incredible chassis was not the real star of the show. The true masterpiece hiding inside the Giulia was its engine. And once you understand what this engine actually was, you will understand exactly why this car changed everything. Alfa Romeo's all-alloy twin-cam engine is, without exaggeration, one of the single greatest road car engines ever produced in the entire 20th century. This was not some ordinary lump bolted into a family car to move it from point A to point B. This engine featured twin overhead camshafts and hemispherical combustion chambers, technology you would expect to find in a purpose-built racing car, not in something a father was using to drop his kids off at school. And here is a statistic that genuinely shocks people when they hear it for the first time. This engine remained in production for an astonishing 40 years, from 1954 all the way through to 1994. 4 decades of continuous production is almost unheard of in the automotive world, and it is a testament to just how brilliant the original design truly was. The Giulia came with 2 versions of this engine, a 1.3-liter and a 1.6-liter. The larger 1.6 pushed out a healthy 101 horsepower, running through a pair of twin Weber carburetors. Now, on paper, 101 horsepower does not sound particularly dramatic by modern standards, but numbers on a page never tell the full story of how a car actually feels. Unlike almost every other engine of that era, this one did not simply produce adequate power and then run out of breath. It loved to rev. It came alive the higher you pushed it, delivering a sensation that, for an ordinary buyer in the early 1960s, must have felt like driving a Ferrari built for the masses. Imagine that feeling for a second. You are an average working person, you have just bought what is supposed to be a sensible family car, and yet every time you put your foot down, you get a taste of genuine exotic thrills. That is the emotional trick the Giulia pulled off, and almost no other manufacturer on the planet was doing anything remotely close to this at the time. Now here is where the story connects directly to the company you already know and love. At this exact moment in history, BMW was in serious trouble. The company was still clawing its way back from the brink of near total bankruptcy, a financial crisis so severe that BMW almost ceased to exist entirely. Their newer compact class of cars had helped stabilize the company financially and kept the lights on. But BMW had not yet found their true identity, the formula that would eventually define the brand for the next 60 years. Then Alfa Romeo showed the entire industry something crucial. They proved that ordinary customers, everyday people with regular incomes, were absolutely willing to pay a premium for a car that was genuinely thrilling to drive, even if that car was supposed to be practical and sensible. This was a massive insight, and the German engineers watching from across the border absolutely took notice. In 1968, 6 full years after the Giulia first hit showrooms, BMW launched the 1602, a car that would later evolve into the now legendary 2002. Think about the description of this new BMW for a moment. Sporty, compact, a revvy engine wrapped inside a genuinely practical body. Does that sound familiar to you? Because it should, because Alfa Romeo had already been executing this exact formula for years before BMW ever got there. The uncomfortable truth that a lot of BMW loyalists do not want to hear is simple. Before the Giulia arrived, sporty cars in this segment were always compromised in some way. Always impractical, always demanding some kind of sacrifice from the buyer. The Giulia proved you did not have to choose, and that single realization is arguably the exact blueprint BMW followed to build the identity that eventually made them one of the most respected performance car manufacturers on Earth. But before we go any further into just how good this car actually was to drive, we need to talk about how it looked, because this is where things get genuinely strange and, honestly, kind of wonderful. Being Alfa Romeo, they simply could not resist doing things in their own slightly mad, unconventional way. Even by modern standards, the Giulia still looks deeply unusual today. It has this massive glass house, huge windows that dominate the silhouette, and from certain angles in photographs, the proportions genuinely look a little awkward, even clumsy. For decades, this styling quirk actually worked against the car's reputation. But here is the twist nobody expects. Alfa Romeo's engineers were absolutely obsessed with aerodynamics, and that seemingly awkward shape was hiding a secret. When the Giulia launched, it was the most aerodynamically slippery mass-production saloon car in the entire world, with a drag coefficient of just 0.34. To put that number into perspective, and this is a fact that genuinely stuns people when they hear it, the achingly beautiful Jaguar E-Type, one of the most celebrated shapes in automotive history, only managed a drag coefficient of 0.44. A car widely regarded as one of the most beautiful designs ever created was significantly less aerodynamic than this strange-looking Italian family sedan. Up close, the design details are genuinely sensational. The distinctive Alfa face at the front, the scalloped cuts carved into the wings, small touches that reveal an obsessive level of craftsmanship. For years, this saloon version lived completely in the shadow of its more conventionally beautiful sibling, the Bertone-styled coupe. But it is worth remembering that the saloon is actually more aerodynamic than the coupe, and many enthusiasts argue it is genuinely better to drive, possibly because its shell is stiffer and more rigid, Nobody is trying to take credit away from BMW here for the incredible cars they eventually produced, but it is impossible to deny that at least in part, we have Alfa Romeo to thank for lighting the fire that pushed BMW toward the identity they would eventually perfect. Now let's actually get inside this car and feel what made it so special, because specifications on paper only tell you half the story. From the very moment you switch the engine on, something becomes immediately obvious. These twin-cam engines are genuinely delightful little machines. There is almost no inertia in the way the engine responds. It revs with an eagerness that feels almost alive under your right foot. Drivers who spend time in these cars describe an immediate sense of familiarity, a feeling of being completely at home, from the particular smell of the interior to the exact way you sit behind the wheel. Now, the driving position is not entirely perfect by modern standards. You typically sit with arms slightly extended and legs somewhat cramped, a quirk that was fairly common among Italian cars of this era. In comparison, the BMW 1602 and 2002 actually offered a noticeably better driving position overall, along with generally higher build quality throughout the cabin. But sitting inside this interior today, even with those small compromises, it still feels genuinely fabulous. The dashboard is trimmed in vinyl, giving it a warm, tactile feel, accented with wood trim that, while not the absolute highest grade material available at the time, still looks elegant and considered. Small details reveal themselves the longer you look. A little plaque bearing the Alfa Romeo symbol, markings carefully inscribed directly into the metal, protective trim along the door sills. These are the kinds of details that separate a car built with genuine passion from one built purely to a specification sheet. The rear window curvature, the scalloped panels running along the flanks that flow seamlessly into the roofline and continue into the shape of the boot. It truly is a thing of beauty once you spend real time studying it. The instrument cluster inside is a masterclass in simplicity that modern car interiors, cluttered with unnecessary screens and buttons, could genuinely learn from. Two large clear dials, a rev counter on one side, your speed on the other, a small clock, a set of indicator lights, and that is essentially the entire dashboard. At the bottom sit two smaller gauges, monitoring oil pressure and water temperature. Nothing more, nothing less. Everything the driver actually needs and nothing they do not. The gear lever rises directly out of the floor in front of the driver, tilted at a very particular angle that feels unique to this specific car, a small ergonomic quirk that somehow adds even more character to the entire driving experience. Now let's actually take this thing out on the road, because this is where the Giulia truly comes alive and proves every single claim made about it. Realistically, with just 100 horsepower on tap, nobody is going to pretend this car feels monstrously fast by any modern measurement. It genuinely does not, and treating it like a straight-line drag car completely misses the point of what this machine was engineered to do. This engine demands revs to give you everything it has, but it also carries a surprisingly healthy amount of torque lower down in the rev range, meaning it never feels completely lifeless even when you are not pushing it hard. The seating position leans slightly more upright than most modern drivers are used to, but everything about the way this car communicates with you is dominated by two absolutely critical elements. First, there is that willing, eager engine we have already talked about. But second, and arguably even more important, there is the steering, and this is genuinely something special. This is a recirculating ball steering system, definitely not a modern rack and pinion setup, technology that on paper should feel vague, disconnected, and imprecise by today's standards. And yet, somehow, Alfa Romeo's engineers dialed this system in with such incredible precision that it defies every expectation you would reasonably have. There is remarkably little dead play around the straight-ahead position, none of the sloppy vagueness you would typically expect from this type of steering mechanism in a car this old, and the very moment you actually begin to add steering input and turn the wheel, something almost bizarre happens. You genuinely feel connected directly to the road surface beneath you, a sensation that many modern electric power steering systems, despite decades of supposed technological progress, completely fail to replicate. For comparison, the BMW 1602 and 2002 also deliver that wonderful go-kart-like sensation, that feeling of pivoting the entire car around your own body through a corner, a trait BMW would eventually become globally famous for. But driving both cars back to back, the Giulia genuinely edges it out. There is an almost oil-like slickness to the way this car steers, combined with an overwhelming amount of communication flowing back through the wheel into your hands, and the overall sensation is nothing short of stunning. Cruising along at around 60 miles per hour, there is remarkably little wind noise intruding into the cabin, a direct result of that obsessive aerodynamic engineering we talked about earlier. For a car built in this era, it is genuinely quiet, even with the small quarter-light windows cracked open for airflow. Despite being a genuinely sporty engine at heart, it does an excellent job of settling down into comfortable grand touring duty when required, meaning you could realistically cover long distances in this car without feeling completely beaten up by the experience. The only real criticism worth mentioning is that slightly upright driving position, which over several hours could become mildly tiring for some drivers. But push this car into tighter, twistier sections of road, and an entirely different personality emerges. The grip levels feel genuinely impressive for a car of this age, and body control remains remarkably tight and composed through corners that would completely unsettle most other family sedans built during this same period. But here is the thing that really matters, and this is the part that separates a genuinely great driver's car from merely a competent one. It is not really about outright grip levels or outright handling limits at all. It is about the way this car constantly communicates with you. Every single input, every subtle change in the road surface, transmitted directly back through the controls into your hands and your seat. These cars are so deeply interactive that this constant conversation between driver and machine is exactly where they truly hook you, and once you experience it, it becomes almost impossible to forget. Through the gears, the noise inside the cabin comes primarily from the intake rather than the exhaust note, a distinctive mechanical induction sound that becomes intoxicating the harder you push the engine. The steering continues to amaze at every single turn, genuinely making you feel like you have become one single connected unit with the machine beneath you. The gearbox itself is impressively slick for a car of this vintage, even if the shift throw is slightly longer than some drivers might personally prefer. And realistically, there is simply not enough raw power available to properly unstick the rear wheels and get playful with oversteer. But that limitation reveals something else entirely. There is essentially zero understeer present in this chassis. The balance feels perfectly, almost eerily neutral, a characteristic that countless modern engineers with access to computer simulation and decades of accumulated data still struggle to replicate consistently. Now, here comes a twist in this story that almost nobody expects, and it might genuinely be the most surprising part of this entire video. For an incredibly long stretch of automotive history, you could buy one of these remarkable machines for what amounted to next to nothing. It seems the unusual, slightly awkward styling genuinely made these cars significantly less desirable compared to their more conventionally beautiful Bertone-styled coupe sibling. At one point in market history, these saloons were worth roughly a fifth or even a sixth of what the equivalent coupe would fetch. The coupes themselves were not even considered particularly affordable during this period, but the saloon sat forgotten in an entirely different, much cheaper tier of the market. And then, gradually, something began to shift. Enthusiasts slowly started paying genuine attention to the saloon. They began noticing the incredible detailing hiding in plain sight, the beautifully sculpted front end, the sheer boldness of how genuinely unusual the whole design actually was. People started buying them, lowering the ride height, fitting a set of period-correct alloy wheels, and the transformation in how the car presented itself was honestly remarkable to witness. Slowly but surely, appreciation for these cars began climbing, and this is where it gets genuinely fascinating from a market perspective. This car did the complete opposite of what almost every other saloon car in automotive history has done. Think about the Jaguar Mark II throughout the 1980s. Hugely desirable, highly sought after by collectors and enthusiasts alike. But as we moved into the 90s and then into the 2000s, market taste shifted dramatically towards sports cars and coupes, and traditional saloons across the entire industry gradually lost their appeal and their value in comparison. This particular car flipped that entire established trend completely on its head. It started its life as the unwanted, overlooked, cheaper sibling that nobody particularly wanted, and then gradually closed the value gap with its far more celebrated coupe counterpart right up until today. Which, unfortunately, means in the present moment, you can no longer simply pick one of these up for a song, for next to nothing like collectors once could. These cars have genuinely earned solid, respectable value in today's classic car market. At the time of researching this story, there were exactly 3 of these cars listed for sale across the entire United Kingdom. One example, painted a striking yellow with the larger 1.6-liter engine, has been specifically prepared for road rally competition, featuring modern BMW seats for improved comfort, though purists seeking factory originality might understandably prefer something closer to how it left the factory. That particular car is currently listed at around £20,000. Another example, finished in a beautifully period-correct dark gray color scheme, carries a few tasteful hot rod-style modifications, but is fitted with the smaller 1.3-liter engine and is listed at around £21,000. And finally, at £23,000, sits what many would consider the most genuinely original example currently available on the market, still riding on its original steel wheels, finished in a beige color scheme that was clearly quite fashionable and favored throughout the 1970s. That particular shade of beige might not appeal to every modern buyer's taste, but if authenticity to the original factory specification genuinely matters to you, this represents about as close as you can realistically get today. That car also runs the smaller 1.3-liter engine, which historically produced around 85 horsepower. Now, on paper, that number sounds genuinely modest by any modern measurement, but these smaller engine versions are actually considerably more fun to drive than raw horsepower figures alone would ever suggest, precisely because you genuinely have to work the engine hard, extract every single drop of performance through skillful, engaged driving, rather than simply relying on brute force to get the job done for you. So let's bring this entire story full circle and really sit with what we have just uncovered together. Before this car existed, the entire concept of a practical, everyday family sedan that could also genuinely thrill its driver on a twisting mountain road simply did not exist in any meaningful way. Alfa Romeo built it first, engineered it with race-bred precision most manufacturers of that era could not even comprehend, and then watched as one of history's most celebrated automotive brands studied their formula, refined it, and eventually turned it into a global performance identity that persists to this very day. Every single time you see a modern BMW advertisement talking about the ultimate driving machine, every single time an enthusiast praises that iconic go-kart-like handling feeling BMW became famous for, there is a strong argument to be made that a piece of that legacy genuinely traces directly back to this strange-looking, oddly proportioned, brilliantly engineered Italian sedan that most casual car enthusiasts today have honestly never even heard of. That is precisely why stories like this one genuinely matter, and why they deserve to be told properly. History has an unfortunate tendency to remember the company that eventually perfected a formula, while quietly forgetting the company that actually invented it in the very first place. The Giulia deserves so much better than being reduced to nothing more than a footnote buried somewhere in BMW's origin story. It deserves to be recognized and remembered as the genuine trailblazer it truly was. The car that fundamentally proved practicality and genuine driving excitement were never actually mutually exclusive concepts to begin with. If this story genuinely opened your eyes to a piece of automotive history you never knew existed, make sure you subscribe, because there are countless other forgotten machines out there just like this one. Cars that quietly shaped the entire industry from behind the scenes without ever receiving the credit they truly deserved. Drop a comment below and let us know. Did you already know about the Alfa Romeo Giulia's incredible hidden influence on BMW's history? Or is this a piece of automotive history that has been completely written out of the mainstream story until right now? Either way, one thing remains absolutely certain. The next time somebody tells you BMW invented the perfect sports sedan formula, you will know the true, complete story, and you will know exactly where to send them to learn it for themselves.